Hey, what's up, guys? My name's Mike. I'm mainly an orchestral composer, but I also do work with metal, EDM, and rock type music. Today, I thought I'd take a stab at doing a song in the style of the Haikyu soundtrack. If you've never seen Haikyu, the anime's sick. If you'd really enjoy it, even if you hate volleyball or sports in general, just watch the anime because it's so good. It's basically like if you took Attack on Titan and threw that into a high school volleyball team, then you get Haikyu. It's crazy good, way over the top as you'd expect. The characters are great, the story's great. So you're just gonna be rooting for those boys. Best part about the whole show is the soundtrack. That might not be true at all. So the song I made is more of the emotional, super hype, end of the match, like very high action, uplifting kind of song. You know, basically like a standard anime song for anything. But yeah, so I'll jump into it here. I'll play through the track first, and then I'll just break it down by section and section, what instruments I chose, why I chose them, the general theme and ideas that the Haikyu soundtracks just follow, and quite honestly most anime follows. And I'll play it now for you guys, and then we'll go and just walk through it. Alright, so the first thing that we'll talk about here is the tempo. It's pretty high, but most Haikyu hype tracks are super high in tempo. Even the, I guess, slower, more emotional ones are still pretty high tempo. One of my reference tracks that I used off of the fourth soundtrack for the fourth season, that was at like 190 BPM. So they're way up there. If you're trying to make a hype Haikyu track, then you need it to be really fast. Generally, with their more hype tracks, they do have pleasant sounding chords. They're usually just more uplifting and emotional, and they make you want to just cheer for the boys as they're just crushing their opponents. This song was written in the key of E with all major chords for the chord progressions, but you can honestly use any key you want as long as you have chords that sound a little uplifting. So the first thing that I want to jump to straight away are the drums. The drums are a huge part of any Haikyu track. If you listen here, you just see that the pace, you just gotta keep the pace up. A big part of the drums too are these little ghost notes in here. Ghost notes are just when the drummer hits the snare really lightly, but it kind of sounds like a little bit of a drum roll. You hear here? Get a little doodle after, right? Without those, the drums don't sound nearly as fast-paced. I mean, it's still a fast drum with the kick, but you need those little ghost notes in there to really keep the momentum going. Even here at the bigger drop, so you hear this. And they always use the hi-hat there, usually an open hi-hat for the bigger, more open stuff. They'll throw some crashes in there, but from the songs that I listen to, there's always just the hi-hat with the kick and the snare as the main portions of it. The kit I'm using here is the One Kit Wonder kit from Get Good Drums. Highly recommend it. It's a super good kit. Everything sounds very nice and it's cheap. There are a lot of drum libraries out there that I've used, and the ones from these guys are both the best that I've used and the cheapest. So I highly recommend them. Moving away from the drums here, other really important stuff in a Haikyu track are the acoustic guitar and the piano. So once I got a little bit of a drum beat going, I wrote that first. I jumped into the piano to lay down some chords. So as I was saying earlier, I wrote this in the key of E and used all major chords for this. So the main chord progression for the second half, the little drop area, you got this. It's pretty simple but effective. And when you just listen to that in, for example, this middle part, a lot of the other stuff is following that same thing. And so the acoustic guitar too has the same chords playing through, but it's really just there to add a little bit of layer on the high end, but enough so that you can hear it in the mix. They always have acoustics, always super fast. The strumming pattern varies dramatically between songs, but always important. So then moving on, I'd probably say the next most important thing would be the strings. Most of the tracks do have a lot of staccato or spiccato style string patterns. And so if you listen to any of the patterns here, these all follow the same chord progression as the piano. They add a nice layer and open it up. And then I layered on some staccato lead lines as well to give it a little bit of a more upbeat, happy feel to it. And that same thing could be said for over here too, except just a little bit different with a legato patch. Now the library that I'm using for all of my orchestral stuff is the BBC Symphony Orchestra by a company called Spitfire Audio. I personally think this is the best bang for your buck out there right now in terms of quality and amount of instruments that you get. You know, you've got your strings, all your necessary string portions of an orchestra, and your brass, woodwinds, percussion, all in just one package. You can even get a free version of it if you just take a little survey, which I'll put that in a link below because it's a no-brainer to get it. And now the brass here, I'll just solo it here and play it. See how it follows the same pattern as the spiccato on the strings, and it also adds a little bit of warmth and depth to the mix. Brass in general is a good way to just fill up a little bit more space in the mix. You don't want to go too heavy on it because then it just overpowers everything and makes things sound muddy. And you don't want to put too much reverb on it either for that exact same reason. But I use it here to add a little bit more to the mix, and then I do mirror some of the lead lines from the strings on here. So for example, right here at this part. Which makes things sound a little bit more dramatic, a little bit more full, as you can hear. I think that's a good way that makes it just lead into here. And brass is something that Yuki uses a lot on the soundtracks. He uses it probably more aggressively than I do in this song. Sometimes you'll have lead trumpet lines or lead horn lines that stand out in the way that I use the strings here instead. Either way, it adds a lot of excitement to the song. Now, one thing that I want to touch on are the guitars in the second half. So most of the hype songs for Haikyu do have distorted electric guitar, coupled with an acoustic, and they'll also throw in some solos. So if I just solo this one here, now that basically sounds like I ripped off Asian Kung Fu Generation. They did the second Naruto opening, like the original Naruto, if you remember that, or like some Bleach songs and Full Metal Alchemist original ones. It's just your standard Japanese rock kind of song. So at the end of the day, that's really what the Haikyu soundtrack is. It's just a rock song, and then they'll throw on orchestral elements that make it really stand out. And if you listen to a lot of different anime music, you'll kind of pick up on that trend throughout. It's a way that they can add a little bit of excitement, especially using a real drum kit, instead of doing more of like your standard orchestral drums, like the big taiko drums and things like that. And jump into a few of the last things I want to touch on. You've got your solo strings here, which are in this little break portion. Now this break portion, I'd imagine, is like a inner monologue, thinking about how much they love each other kind of moment. And then it'll build up until you get something like that. And then it builds up, and then it goes into the main drop. Right? But the big thing on Haikyu tracks is they always use solo strings. They often use solo strings more than they do the large orchestral strings. Now this is mainly used as a more intimate kind of feeling to it. So if I were to use a big orchestra here, it doesn't have the same feel. This makes it a little more intimate, a little more closed off, and then I save the big orchestra for the big moments. Now you can do this in a lot of songs, especially if it's a sadder or a slower song. The solo strings or solo instruments in general just make everything feel a little more close to your heart. But sometimes they use the solo strings in different ways too. Like if you look up one of the songs, The Battle of Concepts, it's got a ripping fiddle going the whole time. You can use solo strings in a lot of ways, but most often they use it for a little bit more of an intimate feel. And the very last thing I'll touch on here are the synths. I didn't use too many synths here, but Haikyu tracks in general have a lot of synths. Sometimes they're even more EDM than this. Usually the ones that they play in the background during talking scenes and things like that always have a little bit more of a EDM feel, but still upbeat. This one here I just use as a little bit of a way to give the section here a little bit more space. So you can see panned hard left and right here. So it just takes up a little bit of room on the outside of your mix, and you can let the lead lines take up the middle portion of it. For example, with The piano here is a pretty similar sound to the synths. And you know, like obviously on its own it's really not much, but once you put it all together, you see that everything just complements each other. So that about wraps it up, guys. If you want to see more of this kind of stuff, let me know. If I went too fast and you think it'd be better to break things down way further, I'm very happy to do that. I'll go through chords, I'll go through why I did certain lead lines, how I made my lead lines. Now I can also go through the mix and master in a separate video if you guys like, but one of the most important things to make sure of is to watch your reverb and watch your release on any of the stringed instruments. Those always take up a huge amount of your mix space, and if you just let it go out of hand, everything is just going to sound super muddy. If you'd like to get the full song, I'll leave a link in the description down below. You could get it on any streaming platform that you'd like. And don't forget to subscribe if you'd want to see more videos like this. I'll keep pumping out new songs and breaking them down for you. I'll be doing anime style music, I'll be doing cinematic scoring, maybe something else in between, and I'll just be breaking it all down. That's it. See you guys.